in the state tournament grants automatic permission and the use of these photographs by the Colorado Bar Association. Anyone in the gallery who is connected with teams and not competing in this round are asked to leave this room, and I believe they're all probably appearing by YouTube. Teams are reminded that no recesses will be allowed absent a health emergency. I believe that we have checked for conflicts, but let me ask the scoring panelists, are there any conflicts that you know of or are aware of?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
No conflicts, Your Honor.
All right, very good, thank you. Teams and coaches are reminded that any disputes arising out of this competition must be reported in accordance with the competition rules. Teams are reminded that their compliance with time requirements will be considered in scoring individual performances. No coach or team member may be seated in the jury box, and again, I think that's applicable to if we were in person. At this time, I'll ask each side to introduce the participating team members, including attorneys and witnesses. Team KK.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Anna Johnson, and I'm on behalf of the people. And today I will be delivering the opening statement, direct examining Alex Fuentes, and cross-examining Avery Becker.
Thank you. And Team II.
Good evening, Your Honor. Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury, opposing counsel. My name is Claire Kenny, and today, along with my co-counsel, we will be representing Avery Becker in the state versus Avery Becker. I will be direct examining Professor Blake Van Owen, cross-examining Kyle Kuzak, and delivering the closing argument.
All right, thank you. Now it is time to swear the various folks in. So team members, if you would raise your right hand for me, please. Team members, do you promise that the presentation you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. And witnesses, if you would raise your right hands. Do you promise that the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to your witness statements, that you will not add material facts or opinions which are not contained in the case problem, and that you will follow the rules and procedures of the mock trial competition?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. And gallery members, including teacher and attorney coaches, family members, and friends, please raise your right hands. Do you promise to represent yourselves as positive role models and to behave in a manner that exemplifies ethical and professional sportsmanship during and after this mock trial round? And I believe those folks are watching on YouTube. And finally, scoring panelists, please raise your right hands. Do you promise to adjudicate the mock trial competition as fairly and objectively as possible in accordance with the facts, procedures, and rules of the mock trial competition?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, very good, folks. That concludes the swearing in portion. And now we are ready to begin our trial. For the prosecution, do you have an opening statement or any preliminary matters before your opening statement?
Yes, we have preliminary matters, Your Honor. We have 3 of them.
All right. Okay.
Asked to remain seated during openings, closings, and examinations of witnesses.
All right, that request is granted. Thank you.
We also asked to display evidence on the screen prior to motions for admission.
And that's fine. I think it's easier if the evidence is on the screen for everyone to see as you're trying to admit it, and we will presume that the jury cannot see that while it's occurring.
And lastly, Your Honor, we would ask that the court have the defendant keep their camera on during the prosecution's direct examination of Alex Fuentes for purposes of potential identification of Avery Becker.
For the defense, do you have any response to that last request?
Your Honor, we haven't done that before. I believe if our Avery Becker is willing to do so, we have no problem with that request.
All right, I'll let the defense figure that out. If Avery Becker is willing to have the camera on the entire time, then that's fine. If not, then Avery Becker will be asked to turn on the camera when it's time to do identification. For the defense, did you have any preliminary matters?
We had a few other preliminary matters, Your Honor. We would also request permission, if it's better in our virtual space, to stand during openings, closings, direct and cross. For some of us, that works better.
And that's fine. If you're more comfortable standing, or if it works for your Zoom presentation, that's perfectly appropriate.
Thank you, Your Honor. We request that the witnesses be deemed to be on the stand when seated and appearing virtually on the Zoom screen.
That's fine, thanks.
And for the purposes of expediency, we would request that any exhibits admitted by the court be deemed to have been constructively published to the jury.
Yes, that's fine, thank you.
And we also seek the court's permission to deem that any exhibit that's shared by means of screen sharing to have been constructively handed to opposing counsel for their review. That's similar to the prosecution's preliminary matter of screen sharing before evidence is admitted.
All right, that request is granted as well. Thank you, counsel.
And
I don't know if, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm so sorry, just one more, Your Honor. We ask that the court defendant may constructively sit at the counsel table for purposes of conferring via Zoom chat with counsel, so he may serve as the defense advisory witness.
And I don't have an issue with that. I think that should be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's all our preliminary matters.
All right, thank you. And I don't know if our scoring panelists want to turn off their video at this time, so we can get ready to go for the people. Are you ready? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
From now on, only turn your video and your microphone on if you are speaking or presenting. Thank you.
All right, prosecution's opening statement.
On a quiet, warm day in March of last year, Mackenzie Brackman was viciously stabbed in the doorway of his home. After an extended and excruciating feud with his mock trial student, the defendant Avery Becker, including Becker vandalizing the victim's vehicle, the Denver Police Department concluded that, without a doubt, Becker was the culprit in Miss Breakin' Gone Bad. Today, Avery Becker is charged with 1 count of murder in the 1st degree and 1 count of 2nd-degree burglary. The prosecution intends to prove that Becker is in fact guilty of these crimes beyond a reasonable doubt, and the prosecution called Detective Jordan Markowitz, Kyle Kuzak, and Alex Cifuentes to further prove this determination. Kyle Kuzak, a certified crime scene reconstruction expert, was first on the scene of this burglary gone terribly wrong. His 19 years of experience told him exactly what he needed to know. Evidence of a break-in, evidence of a knife stolen from the kitchen, and the same missing knife protruding from the victim's back. Later in the trial, Kuzak will describe his method for reasoning and a specific flowchart strategy he uses to ensure accuracy and attention to detail. Detective Jordan Markowitz was next on the scene. Detective Markowitz used her 13 years of experience on the force and 7 years as a detective to do more digging at the crime scene. Detective Markowitz is also a proven expert in cell phone tracking, and it is her professional opinion that the cell phone belonging to the defendant was at the scene of the crime when the crime occurred. The Ring doorbells, doubling as security cameras, placed at different entrances to the victim's home, were also brought to Detective Markowitz's attention. After recovering and reviewing the videos from the Ring doorbells, the culprit can be seen in a mask and other clothing covering the skin, entering and exiting the residence of the victim in a window correlating with the victim's estimated time of death. After compiling these troubling facts, Detective Markowitz decided to interview the friends of the defendant at Colorado High School. Alex Cifuentes, a former friend of the defendant and fellow student at Colorado High School, confirmed many of Detective Markowitz's suspicions about the defendant during their interview. Cifuentes described the defendant and the victim's troubled past, which included the defendant vandalizing the victim's vehicle after the victim released the defendant from the Colorado High School mock trial team for inattentiveness and not sufficiently participating to further benefit the team. Cifuentes also illustrated the roller coaster of highs and lows they had with the defendant beginning with a wonderful friendship and ending with a string of text messages that Cifuentes received from the defendant, placing the defendant at the scene of the crime and showing the defendant's objective to unlawfully enter the victim's dwelling with malicious intent. Overall, this was just a break-in gone bad, fueled by the quarrel between the victim and the defendant, and although the defendant may not have initially aimed to murder the victim, the act was still committed. Throughout this trial, you will hear many mind-wiping stories and narratives about what happened that fateful March afternoon. But you will remember this. Avery Becker did in fact kill Mackenzie Brackman, no matter the initial intent.
Thank you. Opening statement for the defense.
Yes, Your Honor, sorry about that. I am ready to proceed when I may. May I proceed,
Go ahead,
Your Honor?
counsel. Thank you. You may.
Reckless, rushed, guilty until proven innocent. Members of the jury, do those sound like the descriptors of an honest, well-looked-into police investigation? Today, we are going to show you the reality of Detective Markowitz's investigation and the falsity of the prosecution story. Today, we are going to tell you the story of Avery Becker. Avery graduated from Colorado High School in June 2020. But instead of celebrating and moving on to the next stage of his life, the police chose Avery as their suspect for felony murder and second-degree burglary. Today, members of the jury, it is your job to listen to the facts of the case. The burden of proof lies on the prosecution. They must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Avery Becker is guilty of these crimes. And, per jury instruction number 2, if you cannot find evidence of Avery's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, you must find him not guilty. Now, members of the jury, you will hear from the prosecution today about their investigation and their conclusions. We will show you that those fragile conclusions came only from faulty evidence, mistakes, and an urgent desire to condemn a suspect. You will hear that the police spoke with only one mock trial team member, where they received their first and only suspect, Avery Becker. They never looked into other suspects who had significant reasons to be angry with the victim, and they relied on video clips that show only a person in a mask entering and leaving the victim's house, and relied on potentially faulty text messages and cell site data. But let's start at the beginning. You will hear from 3 witnesses today. Avery Becker himself, Taylor Perkins, Avery's best friend, who was with Avery on the day of Coach Brackman's murder. And finally, you will hear from private investigator and Professor Blake Van Owen. Avery will tell you that yes, he and Brackman did have arguments with each other, but he would never commit murder over petty squabbles. You will see Avery is a talented student, a good friend, and a lover of mock trial. But he was also a high schooler. And high schoolers make mistakes, like angrily drawing on a car with what turns out to be permanent marker. Members of the jury, you will see that Avery could not have been pushed so far as to commit murder. Furthermore, you'll hear from both Avery and his best friend, Taylor Perkins, that on the day of the murder, they were looking for Avery's lost phone, scouring the places they had been the night before. You'll see that neither of them could have been on the scene of the crime. Finally, you will hear from Professor and private investigator Blake Van Owen that the police came to the easy conclusion regarding the murder of Mackenzie Brackman. She will show you the assumptions made by crime scene reconstructionist Kyle Cusack and the mistakes made by Detective Markowitz. She will explain to you that yes, there is physical on-scene evidence that an intruder broke into the home of the victim, but that the police fit this evidence to Avery instead of letting it lead to their victim. In regards to the location of Avery Becker's cell phone, Professor Van Owen will share that cell tower data cannot definitively locate a phone, and that Detective Markowitz never looked at any cell site data other than Avery's. Again, members of the jury, the prosecution has the burden of proof today. They must prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Avery Becker was at Mackenzie Brackman's house on March 6, 2020, that he committed criminal mischief, committed second-degree burglary, and, in doing so, murdered Mackenzie Brackman. And so, members of the jury, as you listen to Avery and Taylor tell you the story of March 6th, as you listen to Professor Van Owen explain all of the discrepancies of the investigation, you must ask yourself, is Avery innocent until proven guilty, or has this investigation made him guilty until proven innocent? Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. People, if you would call your first witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. The people call Detective Jordan Markowitz to the stand.
Detective, if you would raise your right hand for me, please. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Your witness, counsel.
Good morning, Detective. Can you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Jordan Markowitz, Markowitz.
Thank you. What do you do for a living?
I'm a homicide detective with the Denver Police Department.
How long have you been doing that?
I started my career with the Denver Police Department around 13 years ago, and I've been a detective for 7 years.
Do you have any special training related to your line of work?
Yes, I have specialized training and experience with cell phone. I have a cell phone technology and forensic data recovery certification from the American Academy of Law Enforcement.
How did you get that certification?
I had to complete a 3-day training course and pass a certification test.
What did you learn during your training?
I learned about the types of cell phone data and records that can be obtained, how to use forensic software such as the Celebrate system to download information from a cell phone, how to acquire and interpret cellular records, and how to obtain and interpret cell tower data.
Has that training been relevant to your work?
Yes, I've downloaded the contents of literally hundreds of cell phones. I also use cell tower data on a regular basis.
How many cases have you had where you use cell phone data?
I've used cell phone data in over 50 cases.
Your Honor, at this time, I tender Detective Jordan Markowitz as a qualified expert witness in the field of cell phone and cell tower data interpretation.
Thank you. Any response from the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, this witness will be so qualified as an expert in the areas as outlined by the prosecution. Go ahead, counsel. Thank you.
How did you get involved in today's case?
I was assigned this case in March of 2020.
Did you go to the scene of the crime?
Yes, I did. I was actually one of the first people to arrive.
Was the crime scene at 444 South Flower Street in the city of Denver, state of Colorado?
Yes.
What did you observe when you arrived at the scene?
Well, I observed the front door was open and the victim was face down on the floor just inside the residence in a pool of his own blood. A large knife was visible just past the body.
Your Honor, may I have permission to share my screen of what has previously been marked as Exhibit 1?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize this?
Yes.
How do you recognize Exhibit 1?
Well, this is a picture of the victim's body at the scene.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of a victim's body?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 1 into evidence.
Any objection?
Objection, Rule 403, more prejudicial than probative.
Thank you. Any response?
Your Honor, may I have opposing counsel describe why they're making this objection?
Ms. Aguirre, why do you believe that this is more prejudicial than probative?
Because it is just trying to Well, it is not probative because it's just trying to create bias in the eyes of the court.
All right, thank you. Any response, counsel?
Your Honor, Exhibit 1 is simply being used as a picture so that the jury can know what the scene looked like and what the victim's body was like. So it's clearly relevant in today's case, and the jury should be able to see what the victim looked like after the murder.
All right, I'll note your objection. I'm going to overrule it and allow the exhibit. The exhibit's admitted. Go ahead, counsel.
Can you please describe the victim?
Well, the victim's shirt was blood-soaked around the upper left, back, and shoulder area, and it was obvious that the victim had been stabbed. From the angle of the body, it appeared that the victim had most likely fallen while trying to leave the residence.
What else did you notice at the crime scene?
Well, I noticed that a chair had been knocked over, and there were scuff marks by the back entrance, and there was a broken plate. Those are clear signs of struggle.
Did you notice anything else?
Well, yes, there's an open knife drawer and a knife block with an empty slot.
Okay, returning to the victim, did you recognize the victim when you saw him?
I didn't recognize him immediately, but once I saw the victim's ID, I knew who it was. The victim was a criminal defense attorney named Mackenzie Brackman.
You mentioned finding Brackman's ID. Did he have anything else on him at the time?
Yes, his phone was on him.
Did you access the contents of his phone?
Yes, I started by downloading the contents of Brackman's cell phone and found a tremendous number of texts related to mock trial, and I found out that he was a high school mock trial coach.
Did you take Brackman's involvement with mock trial into consideration during your investigation?
Yes, I reached out and got the contact information for all of the students on the team.
Did you reach out to any of the students?
Yes, I spoke with a student named Alex Cifuentes who told me that another student on the team had texted something about a plan to trash Brackman's house.
Did you conduct a proper interview of Cifuentes?
Objection, hearsay.
Any response, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm asking Detective Markowitz about the steps that she took during the investigation. Basically what Cifuentes told her affected the steps that she did take during the investigation, and so it's an exception to hearsay.
And Ms. Aguirre, any reply?
It is still hearsay because it's an out-of-court statement, and she's using it to try and prove the matter asserted, and she cannot talk about what Ms. Fuentes said.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may, Ms. Jack. Go ahead.
She didn't make a statement about something Alex Cifuentes said. She simply talked about how there was another student on the team that Alex Cifuentes knew of who had a plan to trash Brackman's house. And I just asked her if she interviewed Cifuentes.
All right. I'm going to allow the statement finding that it's being offered to demonstrate the effect on the listener, in this case, Detective Markowitz. So your objection's overruled. You may continue, counsel. Thank you.
Did you conduct a proper interview with Cifuentes?
Yes. I had Alex Cifuentes and Cifuentes' parents come to headquarters to conduct a full interview.
What did you learn during the interview?
Well, it turned out that the other student was actually a senior on the mock trial team named Avery Becker, who did not have a good history with Brackman.
What had happened between Brackman and Becker?
Brackman had recently kicked Becker off the mock trial team after he vandalized Brackman's car. Becker then sent a text to Cifuentes, who was also on the mock trial team, pleading with Cifuentes for help to get back on the team.
And did Cifuentes agree to help?
No, Cifuentes texted back that Brackman wouldn't budge. Becker responded that they were going to trash Brackman's house while Brackman was at work.
And did you see the text?
Cifuentes didn't bring the phone to the interview, but I did see the screenshots. He sent them to me the next day.
Your Honor, may I have permission to share my screen with what has previously been marked as Exhibit 14?
Yes, go ahead, counsel. Thank you.
Do you recognize Exhibit 14?
Yes.
How do you recognize this?
Well, these are the screenshots of the text conversation between Cifuentes and Becker.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of those screenshots?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 14 into evidence.
Thank you. Any objection, Ms. Aguirre?
Yes, hearsay and lack of foundation.
Response, Ms. Jack?
Yes, Your Honor. This is an exception to hearsay under Rule 8043 because it is a statement made by a party opponent. And in regards to the other objection, I did lay foundation about the interview with Cifuentes and what Markowitz knew about this conversation before she asked for the screenshots.
Thank you. Ms. Aguirre, in your reply.
However, you don't have any proof if Avery actually sent these texts.
All right, I'll note your objection, Ms. Aguirre. I'll let you cross-examine on that issue, but I'm going to let the exhibit in. Thank you. The objection's overruled. Go ahead, Ms. Jack.
What do these texts indicate about Becker's plans?
Well, these texts indicate that Becker planned to break in and trash Brackman's house as a form of retaliation.
Did you contact Avery Becker after speaking with Cifuentes?
Yes, I immediately contacted her, but I was told that I would have to communicate with her through her lawyer.
And did you communicate with her attorney?
Yes, after obtaining a warrant to search Becker's phone, her attorney provided me with the phone number.
What did you do next?
I got a court order to obtain records from Becker's service provider and also cell tower records or CDRs for March 6th of 2020.
Why did you do that?
Well, I wanted to track the location of the phone on the day of the murder.
What information do CDRs provide?
Well, generally, the records show things like the date and time of communication, whether it was call or text message, and if it was a call, how long it lasted. Additionally, and this is the important part, the record also identifies the cell tower with which the cell phone was communicating with, including the specific antenna or tower.
Your Honor, may I have permission to share my screen of what has previously been marked as Exhibit 16?
Yes, go ahead, counsel. Thank you.
Do you recognize Exhibit 16?
Yes.
How do you recognize it?
Well, this is an image of the CDR data that shows the location of the cell towers that Becker's phone communicated with on March 6th and the time leading up to the homicide. It also depicts what I believe to be the most likely route that Becker's phone took that day.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of that data?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 16 into evidence.
Thank you. Any objection, Ms. Aguirre?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, this exhibit is admitted. Thank you. Go ahead, counsel.
What did you learn about Becker's location?
So what the CDR data indicates that Becker was home somewhere between 12:45 and 12:50 p.m., then left and drove towards Brackman's house, traveling most likely along Rock Creek Parkway at 12:55 p.m. Then from 1:05 p.m. to 1:17 p.m., Becker was at Brackman's home.
And what did the CDR data tell you?
Well, based on all of the evidence we collected, it is absolutely clear that Avery Becker went to Mackenzie Brackman's house on March 6th.
What was it that led you to ultimately charge Avery Becker for this crime?
Well, Becker had a bad relationship with Brackman prior to the murder, and based on the screenshots I obtained from Cifuentes' phone, Becker had a plan to trash Brackman's house. The reliable CDR data I collected from the day of the murder shows Becker traveling to Brackman's house and places her at the scene of the crime.
Thank you. And no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead, counsel.
Good morning, Detective Markowitz.
Good morning.
You are in charge of this whole investigation, is that correct?
That's correct.
You were in charge of deciding who to talk to?
That's correct.
In charge of deciding what decisions to make?
That's correct.
What potential evidence to gather?
Yes.
And what to look into?
That's correct.
So let's start at the very beginning. You were called to Coach Brackman's house to investigate his death, is that correct?
That's correct.
And after a little bit of searching, you found that he was a part of mock trial.
Right.
So the first place you went to investigate was a high school.
Yes.
And earlier in court, you also just testified that you got all of the information for the students on the mock trial team.
That's correct.
And that by looking through his phone, you found that he was a big part of mock trial.
Yes, he was the coach.
And even though you have all the information on every single student on the team, you only investigated Avery Becker.
Well, yes, because that was the most reasonable person to investigate. It only
You-
made sense.
And you only talked to Alex Fuentes.
Yes, because again, it was only reasonable and it only made sense to do just them.
So you didn't talk to any other student lawyers on the team.
No, again, because that wasn't necessary.
And did you talk to anyone else at the school?
No.
Now, I'd like to talk about a different part of your investigation. You conducted a cell site data recovery investigation for this case, is that right?
Yep.
And earlier, you just used it to prove that Mr. Becker was at Mr. Brackman's house on March 6th.
Yes.
However, does it physically show that he ever entered Mr. Brackman's house?
Well, no, but there's other evidence to prove that. And also, the phone was traveling along that way, so it makes sense.
That was a yes or no question.
Well, yes.
Does it also show that he even touched Mr. Brackman's front porch?
Well, not necessarily. Again, it's just a cell tower record, but it does show that the phone was very close to the house, and it puts Avery at the scene of the crime.
Right. It simply shows that Mr. Becker's cell phone sent a signal to a cell phone tower in the vicinity of Mr. Brackman's house.
Yes, but it shows a pathway leading to Brackman's house, which shows
But
that the phone was most likely at the house or by the house.
But based on that evidence alone, you have no idea who physically possessed the phone on March 6th.
Well, not necessarily. From the cell tower data doesn't show the person holding the phone. It just shows where the phone went. But it is pretty clear and it makes sense that Avery would have possessed his phone.
That's not what he claimed in his affidavit.
Well, it makes sense that Avery would have had his phone.
And isn't it also true that cell phones don't always connect to the nearest cell phone tower?
Yes, but it's not that common.
But it could happen, is that correct?
It could happen.
And even though you know this, you still decided that Avery Becker was the only suspect in this crime.
Again, yes, because the phone is going to the house.
Right. Now, Mr. Becker was very clear about his whereabouts on March 6th, looking for his phone with his friend Taylor Perkins.
Yes.
But you didn't conduct a cell site data recovery investigation on Ms. Perkins' cell phone to confirm their alibi, did you?
No, because it's clear again that Avery's phone was at the house or was going to the house.
Now, let's go back a little bit. After investigating the house on the first day, did you go to any of the restaurants that Mr. Becker or Taylor Perkins said they went to?
I went to the Fry Shack. Or no, I did not.
Did you go to the Fry Shack?
No, I did not.
And did you go to the mall to see if Mr. Becker and Ms. Perkins had been there?
No.
Did you maybe check any of the security footage to confirm their alibi?
I did not.
And this was because you're convinced that the prime suspect of Mr. Brackman's murder was Avery Becker.
Yes, it's quite clear.
Who in fact was the only person you investigated in connection with this crime.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Any response, Ms. Aguirre?
I'll rephrase, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. I'll sustain the objection. Go ahead, Ms. Aguirre.
So it is true that Mr. Becker was the only suspect you investigated throughout this case, is that right?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Ms. Aguirre?
It's okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any redirect, Ms. Jack?
Yes, a brief redirect, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead, counsel.
Why did you choose Avery Becker as the primary suspect in today's case?
Well, again, Avery had a bad history with Brackman, and it does show that the cell phone went down a route to Brackman's house.
No further questions, Your Honor.
And any recross based upon that limited redirect, Ms. Aguirre?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down, Ms. Mr. Mark or Ms. Markowitz. Thank you. All right, if the people wish to call their next witness, please.
The prosecution calls Kyle Kuzak to the stand.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Kuzak. Can you state and spell
let
your
me swear your witness in first. Mr. Kuzak, if you raise your right hand for me, please. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, your witness, counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Kuzak. Can you state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Kyle Kuzak, K-U-Z-A-K.
What's your current occupation?
Well, right now I'm a civilian employee for the Denver Police Department, and I'm a crime scene reconstruction investigator.
How many years of experience do you have working as a crime scene reconstruction investigator?
So I have 19 years, and with this, I have investigated complex crime scenes like home invasions, burglaries, and homicides.
How long have you been working as a CSR for the Denver Police Department?
For 3 years.
How are you qualified as a CSR?
Well, I'm certified by the Colorado Bureau of Investigations as a CSR.
At this time, the prosecution was to qualify Mr. Kuzak as an expert in crime scene reconstruction pursuant to CRE 720 and ask that he be allowed to provide expert opinion in this matter.
Thank you. Any objection to this witness being qualified as an expert, Ms. Kinney?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. Kyle Kuzak will be qualified as an expert in the areas as outlined by counsel. Go ahead, counsel.
Where did the homicide occur?
It occurred at 444 South Flower Street.
Did you visit the scene of the homicide?
Yes, I did, after it was being processed by other members of the crime lab.
Did you read and review all of the police records?
Yes, I reviewed all of the police reports, the photographs, the security cameras, and evidence.
Did you conduct an investigation after visiting the site of the homicide?
So I conducted a 5-step investigation, and I used my 2 principles I use for every investigation while I conducted my work.
What are the 2 principles that guide your work in the investigation?
Well, first, I assume all my cases are going to trial, so I conducted a thorough, comprehensive investigation. And then second, from the first day, I documented, organized all my evidence with a mindset for my future reconstruction.
What was the process of your investigation?
Well, my first step was I used my witness tracking spreadsheet to summarize key points of information from all the witnesses and suspects.
What were the next steps in your investigation?
Well, then I grew the existing organizational framework for information, evidence, images, so I could document relationships, analysis, and lab submissions.
After your investigation, what conclusion did you find?
Well, the first thing I noticed was the perpetrator was matching the general height and build of the defendant.
What was the first thing the intruder did on the day of the crime?
Well, they approached the victim's residence, and at first they stepped on the front porch and they checked the front door, which we can see with the Ring security camera.
What was the second thing they did?
So then they went to the south side of the residence, and they were out of the camera's range. However, additional security camera on that side of the house was then able to pick them up, and we could see them opening a fence gate and proceeding into the backyard.
Your Honor, may I have the permission to share my screen?
Yes, counsel, go ahead.
Do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize this?
Well, I see this as Exhibit 12.
Your Honor, the prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 12 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, this exhibit will be admitted. Thank you, counsel. You may continue.
Can you explain what Exhibit 12 shows?
Well, it shows that we see the perpetrator left the range of the second camera, but then 10 seconds later, they are captured by a security camera at the rear door of the victim's residence. And then this video from this camera shows the perpetrator opening the sliding glass door, and then they entered the residence.
Were there any fingerprints or DNA found at the gate or the back door?
No, but this is commonly expected.
Why is this commonly expected?
Well, contrary to popular belief, you actually don't see fingerprints and DNA left on every surface.
You talk about being partially able to see in Exhibit 18. What does this show in the case?
Well, we see scuff marks on the kitchen floor near the back door.
Your Honor, may I have the permission to share my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize this?
The scuff marks from Exhibit 18.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of that?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 18 into evidence.
Thank you. Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, this exhibit will be admitted. Thank you. Go ahead, counsel.
What do you conclude from this exhibit?
Well, I can see a struggle in the kitchen immediately. Inside, because they are very close to the back door. Then the floor scuffing also shows that at least 2 individuals were engaged in close contact in the kitchen close to the back door.
Your Honor, may I have the permission to share my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize this?
I recognize this as the knife seen from Exhibit 7.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of that?
Yes, it is.
What about Exhibit 8?
Yes, I see this as a knife, the knife block in Exhibit 8.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of that?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 7 and 8 into evidence.
Thank you. Any objection to these 2 exhibits coming in?
My only objection would be needlessly cumulative and relevance, as both of these are pictures of knife areas in the home.
Thank you. Any response, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. The victim was stabbed in the back, so obviously showing the knife block and the knife drawer is relevant to the case.
Ms. Kinney, any reply?
I believe that showing both is needlessly cumulative, as the knife could have come from either of those places or from somewhere else.
All right, I'll note your objection, Ms. Kinney. I'm going to allow it. They do show different portions of the areas where the knife could come from, so I think they're relevant. They will be admitted. You may continue, counsel. Thank you.
What do you see from Exhibit 7?
Well, I see the kitchen drawer is open, and we can see knives and kitchen utensils in it.
Do you believe the knife from a drawer was the murder weapon?
No, I don't.
What do you believe the murder weapon was?
Well, in Exhibit 8, there is a knife missing in the top right corner in the knife block, and I believe this was the knife used to kill Brackman.
What evidence supports your claim here?
Well, the knife found in the body, with the body, and seen in Exhibit 5 fits the size and space seen in the knife block.
Can you please recap and state what you think occurred from the evidence and investigation?
So initially, the victim was lured by their Ring security system as the intruder approached the front door and then went to the back of the residence.
What happened next?
So then the perpetrator entered, and initially the victim looked for a knife in the drawer, but then just decided to grab a knife from the knife block.
Did the intruder then enter the residence?
Yes, the intruder entered through the back door, and then the 2 individuals struggled over the knife, and the struggle moved to the kitchen table.
How do you know the struggle moved to the kitchen table?
We can see the scuff marks from the floor.
How did the stabbing then occur?
So the intruder then disarmed the victim and obtained the victim's knife, and then the stabbing occurred in the upper shoulder or back area.
How can you be sure they were stabbed in the back area?
Well, based off the evidence, we know Brackman would have been alerted by the Ring doorbells and sound of his back door opening. And this means that the perpetrator and victim are in close proximity and engaged with each other, as the perpetrator was able to reach over and stab him in his back.
What is your final conclusion?
And based off the facts and data I have, this was a planned burglary gone wrong, with the perpetrator knowing the property and expecting the victim to not be home.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Kuzak. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your job. You're a civilian employee, is that correct?
Yes, that is true.
You're not a police officer.
No, I'm not.
You don't have the same experience and training as a police officer.
Well, technically, I'm a crime scene reconstruction investigator, so I have the experience and training for this.
Yes, as a CSR, but not as a police officer.
No.
Additionally, when you review a scene, I think as you've already stated, you must wait to look at it until it's been processed by the police in the crime lab. Is that right?
Well, that's not always true. Once I got to the scene of the crime, it was pretty much near finishing processing by the team.
Yes, so that was after the team had processed it.
Almost fully, yes.
Now, thank you, Mr. Kuzak. Now, you reviewed Professor Van Owen's investigation for this case. Is that right?
I did.
And we can agree that yourself and Professor Van Owen came to different conclusions as to what took place on March 6th.
Different conclusions for parts, yes.
And now you know Professor Van Owen spent some time as a police officer.
Until he was removed from his job, yes.
Professor Van Owen left his job voluntarily, but that question was Professor Van Owen spent some time as a police officer, yes?
Yes, he did.
And we agreed earlier that you don't have the same experience and training as a police officer.
Well, technically for this case, I'm trained as a crime scene reconstruction investigator, and a police officer doesn't necessarily have all the experience of seeing a crime scene, being able to determine the analysis and what occurred.
Yes, Mr. Kuzak, you even say in your statement that some of Professor Van Owen's conclusions fall outside of your area of expertise.
I do, yes, I do say this at one point.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzak. Now, you reviewed the police's investigation, their documents, to help you with your work for this case. Is that right?
Yes, and I do this for all cases.
And in your witness statement and in your direct a minute ago, you say that you always assume every case is going to trial. That's part of how you conduct your work.
That is true.
And to the best of your knowledge, Avery Becker was the police's primary suspect for the whole of this case. Is that right?
Well, yes, and to the best of knowledge, the evidence best reflects that she committed the crime.
Question was, Avery Becker was the police's primary suspect. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Kuzak, excuse me, I'd like to talk about your reconstruction of the scene. It involves a fight between the intruder and Mr. Brackman. Is that correct?
Yes, it does.
And one of your supporting pieces of evidence are scuff marks on the floor. Is that right?
Scuff marks, yes.
And there are pictures of scuff marks for this case.
Yes, we do see the pictures.
Your Honor, may I have permission to have my timekeeper pull up what has been previously admitted, Exhibit 18?
Yes, go ahead, counsel. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Kuzak, scuff marks cannot be carbon dated, can they?
What do you mean when you say that?
You can't tell how old these scuff marks are.
Well, no, we cannot in this case.
And Mr. Kuzak, you've said that you believe the scuffle moved towards the kitchen. Is that right?
Yes.
Now these scuff marks, they're right next to the back door, aren't they?
Yes, next to the back door, which is next to the kitchen.
And Mr. Kuzak, and not as an expert, just as a lay witness, I think you'd agree that the back door is a common place for people to step in, shuffle, wipe their feet.
That is true.
And Mr. Kuzak, these scuff marks, they take the shape of parallel lines, don't they?
Kind of, not fully.
They appear very close to parallel lines, would you say?
Yes.
And again, not as an expert, just as a lay witness, I think you'd agree that most people walk with their feet in about approximately parallel lines.
That is true.
And Mr. Kuzak, nowhere in your witness statement or your report do you mention any other scuff marks anywhere else in the house.
I do not.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzak. Thank you, timekeeper. I am done with Exhibit 18. Now, Mr. Kuzak, you discussed some ring videos that you reviewed for this case. Is that right?
That is true.
You watched those videos thoroughly?
I have.
Those videos weren't taken by yourself, of course. They are the ring videos.
No, yes, that is true.
Your Honor, may I have permission to have the timekeeper pull up what has been previously marked as Exhibits 10 and 11?
Yes, counsel, go ahead.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Kuzak, would you say this is a fair and accurate copy of the ring videos that you viewed for this case?
Yes, this is.
And you recognize these videos as what you've already looked at?
Yes, that is true.
Your Honor, I move to admit Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Any objection, counsel?
No, Your Honor.
All right, this exhibit will be admitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, if we could move to Exhibit 11. Do you recognize this as the ring video that you viewed for your work in this case?
Yes,
This is a fair and accurate copy of that video?
this is.
Your Honor, I move to admit Exhibit 11 into evidence.
Thank you. Any objection, counsel?
No, Your Honor.
All right, this exhibit will be admitted as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Kuzak, you can't make out any facial features of the intruder, can you?
Facial features, no, they're hidden by the mask.
So you can't definitively identify any facial features that are the same on the intruder as the defendant in court today.
I cannot.
Also, Mr. Kuzak, you've said before that you assume the knife came from inside the house. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the most probable in this case.
In these videos, you can't see underneath the intruder's shirt or clothing, can you?
No, you cannot.
Now, Mr. Kuzak, I'd like, timekeeper, if you could move back to Exhibit 10, please. I'd like you to look closely at the shoes on Exhibit 10 when we are able to zoom in. To the best of your ability, would you agree that those shoes don't have laces?
I don't think so from looking, no.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzak. Now, if we could move to Exhibit 11 and zoom in on the shoes when the time occurs in the video. Thank you, timekeeper. Would you agree, looking closely at these shoes, that they do in fact have laces?
Yes, those do.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzak. Now, you never mentioned any sort of discrepancy in the shoes anywhere in your report or statements, did you?
No, I did not.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzak. Thank you, timekeeper. I am done with those exhibits. Now, Mr. Kuzak, you say yourself that you did not have a lot of...
Objection, Your Honor, for evidence 10 and 11, I guess. It's relevant.
Ms. Kinney, any response?
Your Honor, these ring videos show the intruder that entered Mr. Brackman's house, and the whole point of this case is understanding who in fact entered Mr. Brackman's house. I'm using this evidence to try and prove that it was not in fact Avery Becker, as there is nothing in these videos that can point definitively to Avery Becker, and in fact there are two different pairs of shoes, so we can't even point definitively to one intruder.
Any response or reply, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor, but both the intruder were wearing the same clothes and same mask.
All right, the exhibits were admitted. Counsel Kinney was simply pointing out some differences in those exhibits. That'll be a matter left for the jury, so I'm going to overrule your objection. You may continue, Ms. Kinney. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Kuzak, you said yourself you wished you had more evidence in this case. Is that right?
Well, in most cases, you could always wish you had more evidence.
Of course. And so is it fair to say you made a number of assumptions in this case?
I don't think it's fair to say a number. I think we are also using the evidence to the best of the ability in this case.
Yes, Mr. Kuzak. You weren't there as the crime scene, as the crime was taking place. Is that right?
No, I was not.
You never spoke with Avery Becker?
I don't recall. I think in our witness statement, no, I have not. Sorry.
You have no fingerprint data?
No, but this is commonly expected in most cases.
You have no DNA data?
This is also commonly expected in most cases.
You have no license plate numbers?
I don't think this fully, well, I haven't, vehicle-wise, no. We also couldn't see any vehicles where the perpetrator entered from.
Yes, Mr. Kuzak. And you have no video from inside the house as the crime was committed?
No, there's none.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzak. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect, counsel?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you may step down, Mr. Kuzak. Thank you. People, call your next witness, please.
The people call Alex Cifuentes to the stand.
All right, Ms. Cifuentes, go ahead and raise your right hand for me, please. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, your witness, counsel.
Good morning, Ms. Cifuentes. Will you please state your name for the record?
Alex Cifuentes.
And will you please spell your name for the record?
ALEXSIFUENTES.
What high school do you go to?
I go to Colorado High School.
And what activity did you do at Colorado High School?
I participated in mock trial.
Who was Mackenzie Brackman?
Mackenzie Brackman was my mock trial coach.
And how did you feel about his death?
I thought it was horrible. Coach Brackman was a good teacher. He was so helpful and he all wanted us to succeed, which I respected a lot. He didn't deserve any of this. And you know, in person, it's all a lot to process. In the end, though, I do know that Avery murdered him. So I think that Avery has to be held accountable.
Let's talk about the defendant.
Your Honor. This witness just stated that that they are sure that Avery was the person that murdered Coach Brackman. This is speculation. There is no way that this witness can know that's true.
Any response, Ms. Johnson?
May I just move on?
All right, I'll sustain the objection. Move along, Ms. Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Your
Honor. Let's talk about the defendant, Avery Becker. How well did you know Becker?
Pretty well. We were on mock trial for 3 years together, so.
At this time, the people asked that the defendant, Avery Becker, turn their camera on for identification purposes.
All right, Avery Becker, if you would turn on your camera. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Ms. Cifuentes, could you please identify Mr. Becker by describing an article of clothing they are wearing?
Yes, he's wearing a black blazer and I believe a green tie.
Let the record reflect identification of the defendant subject to cross-examination. Okay.
Thank you. The record will reflect that the witness has identified Avery Becker, subject to cross-examination. Thank you, Mr. Becker. You may shut off your camera now.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Cifuentes, what was the defendant's role on the mock trial team usually?
He was usually an attorney, but Avery also played several witness roles. And on the stand, he can make you believe that everything he said was completely true. It was crazy.
How did the defendant treat mock trial competitions?
At competition, Avery was really successful. He was smart and quick thinking on his feet, so he won a lot of awards.
And how did the defendant treat mock trial practices?
At practices, it was very different. He was always late on his phone, not practicing or preparing his crosses or directs, and just overall not a good student. I know that he and Mr. Brackman didn't have a great relationship either.
Okay, so why do you think that he was good at competitions but not good at practice?
Like I said earlier, Avery was really good at making things up on the spot and lying under pressure, so he got away with it at mock trial competitions. However, it left the team in a state of constant anxiety, and I know a lot of people couldn't stand Avery.
How would you describe your relationship with the defendant, Mr. Becker?
Yeah, Avery and I were basically best friends in mock trial. He was the one who even convinced me to join when I was a freshman. And as teammates, we push each other to work harder, but it would annoy me that he wouldn't prepare or practice for competitions because I take mock trial very seriously. And some people tried to call us rivals, but we were never rivals. We were always friends and teammates.
Okay, where did you see the defendant outside of mock trial?
I saw him at the Fry Shack restaurant sometimes. That's a place where a lot of like high schoolers go. And I did see him the day before Coach Brackman was murdered.
Who else did you recognize at the Fry Shack from mock trial on that day?
Avery was there, and so was his other good friend, Taylor Perkins.
What was Avery's mood? Was he still mad about being kicked off the team at that time?
He did seem disappointed since the events had been so recent, but he was nice to me and was in a relatively good mood. And based on earlier conversations, it did seem like he had something else planned for Coach Brackman.
Objection, Your Honor. This is also speculation, as there's no way that Alex Cifuentes can know how Avery Becker was feeling on the day at the Fry Shack.
Johnson, your response?
I'm only asking my witness to testify about their observations. I'm not asking them to speculate.
And Mr. Abel, your reply?
Well, no response, Your Honor.
All right, I'll overrule the objection. You may move along. Thank you, counsel.
What else did you, the defendant, and Perkins do at the Fry Shack?
We just talked for a little bit, and Avery did show me a game he had on his phone, and he let me play it for a little bit.
Okay. Coming back to the defendant's poor mock trial behavior, how did Coach Brackman respond to the defendant not pulling their weight at mock trial?
Yeah, Coach Brackman was frequently frustrated with Avery for being late and not practicing, to the point where he even decided to demote Avery to the B team.
And how did Avery react to that negativity?
Avery was really infuriated. He even got his friend Taylor Perkins to step down from the team in total so he could be put back onto the A team. And after another incident, he took a permanent marker from school, went out to Coach Brackman's car, and wrote Worst Attorney Award on the hood of the car. So that did get him permanently kicked off the team.
Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay.
Any response, Ms. Johnson?
No response. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. Thank you. Any cross-examination, Mr. Ebel?
Yes, Your Honor, if I may.
Go
May
ahead,
I,
counsel.
Your Honor? Sorry, may I begin, Your Honor?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Fuentes.
Good morning.
You went to Colorado High School, right?
Yes, I did.
And you were on the mock trial team.
Yes.
Yes. And Mackenzie Brackman was the coach of this team.
Yes, he was, and he was a really good coach.
And Avery Becker was also on this team, right?
Yes.
And you say you are basically best friends with Avery Becker.
Yeah. Avery and I have been good friends throughout all of the time we were in mock trial together.
You credit Avery for helping convince you to join mock trial.
Yes, because we're friends.
But you don't mention hanging out with Avery outside of mock trial in your witness statement, do you?
We did hang out at the Fry Shack. So, yes, we have hung out.
Right, but you don't mention going over to Avery's house.
No.
Nor do you mention Avery coming over to your house.
No, but we were good friends on mock trial. We always were very competitive and good teammates. So, yeah.
Right. Avery Becker was basically your best friend.
Yeah, I would consider Avery a really close friend, yes.
Now, moving on, Avery and Coach Brackman had their differences, right?
Yes, they had very different styles of how mock trial should look.
And these differences eventually got Avery demoted from A team.
Yes, rightfully so. Avery was always late, never practiced. I mean, if I was in Coach Brackman's spot, I can see why he did that.
But Avery rejoined their team in time for the regional tournament, right?
He did, only because he convinced his friend Taylor Perkins to step down from the team, so I guess technically yes, but he did that for how he got back on wasn't a great reason.
And at that regional tournament, Avery won Best Attorney and the Best Closing Awards, right?
He did win those awards, however, it was mostly luck, I think.
But you felt that this was a slap in the face.
I did feel like it was a slap in the face. Like I said, I take mock trial very seriously. I spend a lot of time preparing, and I understand that mock trial isn't fair and some judges might like other people. So I see how that happened, and it like made a lot of people mad, but you know, he got those awards and that's just the facts.
Thank you. Avery eventually got kicked off the team for good, though, right?
Yes, after a big incident where he took a permanent marker and wrote on his coach's car. That's enough to get someone kicked off the team, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, and later, Avery texted you trying to get back on the team.
Yes, Avery did.
Was there an objection, Your
Your
Honor?
response? Yes.
Sorry, I
Ms.
didn't
Johnson,
catch
could you
the
restate your objection?
Yes, my objection was hearsay.
May I ask
Hearsay objection, Mr. Edel.
May I ask on what grounds that is hearsay?
You were asking my witness about the text they had between my witness and Becker, and that's hearsay.
Mr. Ebel, your response?
Well, again, this is a party opponent statement, as these texts were between Avery and Alex. So therefore, there's an exception to hearsay, and I can talk about the text messages as they are also already admitted into evidence.
Ms. Johnson, your reply?
No response, Your Honor.
All right. I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead. Continue, counsel.
Thank you. Yes, and you later had an interview with the police detective regarding these text messages.
Yes, and Avery did text me because we're friends, so yeah.
Thank you. But you didn't bring your phone with the text messages on them to the interview.
No, I forgot my phone because it has a really bad battery, so I left it in the charger, and my dad yelled at me that we were leaving, so I did forget it at home, but I did send screenshots to them afterwards.
You left it on the charger at home. Yep.
Yes.
Did Detective Markowitz ever come to get the phone?
No, I told them that I could bring it into them later. However, they told me it wasn't necessary, so I didn't see it necessary either.
Did they ever ask for a follow-up interview regarding the phone?
No, because I did send them screenshots of exactly what happened.
Right, yeah. You sent screenshots of the text messages to the police.
Yes, I sent screenshots, and that was sufficient, I believe.
And the police, they accepted them?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my place to say what's evidence and what's not.
Okay. Now, after that interview, you were contacted by a private investigator.
Yes, an investigator did come by and attempt to talk to me.
And that private investigator wanted to interview you as well.
Yes, and I knew they were on the defense team, so I didn't allow an interview because I know mock trial, I know how defense works. I know that they only wanted to get stuff out of me that they could use to impeach me or make me look bad. So.
Right. So you refused to meet with this investigator.
Yes, I refused to meet with the investigator, but they still tried to ask me questions, and they still tried to probe me, so.
I had an objection to that question asked and answered.
Your response, Mr. Ebel?
Your Honor, I'm just simply laying more foundation for the reason why Alex Fuentes did not meet with this private investigator.
Ms. Johnson, and your reply?
No reply.
All right. I'm going to allow the examination overruled. Go ahead.
Right. So you didn't show this private investigator the text messages?
I didn't, but they seem to already know about them, and they told me that Avery actually accused me of taking her phone.
Right. No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Do the people rest?
Yes, Your Honor, the people rest.
Thank you. All right, the defense may call their first witness. Thank you.
The defense would like to call Avery Becker to the stand.
All right, Mr. Becker, please raise your right hand for me.
Judge, we just lost your audio.
Try.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Go ahead and raise your right hand again. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Your witness, counsel. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Becker.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, my name is Avery Becker, and last year I was a senior at Colorado High School.
And what did you like to do as a senior at Colorado High School?
You know, I loved what most students love. I loved hanging out with my friends, and me and one of my best friends, Taylor, decided to do mock trial, which I love now as well.
Could you tell us about your experience with mock trial?
Mock trial meant a lot to me. I loved it, and I loved that I was able to hang out with my friend Taylor too.
Did you enjoy your team?
Overall, I had a great team. I really enjoyed it. And I mean, I had a coach that I had some difficulties with, but, he did make the team more competitive for sure. And, Taylor was on the team and I really enjoyed hanging out with her.
Could you describe those difficulties that you had?
Well, me and Mr. Brackman, my coach, had tensions between us some of the time, and sometimes we get into arguments. And probably our biggest argument was just after regionals.
What happened?
Well, as I said, it was just after regionals, and I thought I had done really well. I had won best closer, and I was really proud of myself. But, Mr. Brackman didn't seem very happy with me at all. He actually seemed really angry at me, and he told me that I didn't deserve the award and I wasn't going to do good at state. I mean, I rushed out of the practice, and what I did next was probably the stupidest thing I've ever done.
What did you do?
It was really dumb. I had taken what I thought was a dry erase marker out of practice. We had been using dry erase markers, so I assumed that it was dry erase, and I was so mad, and I drew on his car, and I mean, I feel horrible about it now, but he kicked me off the team.
Did you intend to cause harm to Coach Brackman's car?
No, I mean, I thought I was trying to send a harmless message is what I was trying to do. I thought it was a dry erase marker, and it was just stupid, and I never should have done it.
Did you tell anyone about what happened?
Yeah, afterwards I talked to my mom about it, and she told me to do the right thing, which was to apologize. And so I tried to apologize. I went to his office and tried to apologize in person, but he wouldn't see me. And I tried to text him, and he just ignored me. And I mean, I never got to the chance to apologize before he was murdered.
Thank you, Avery. I'd like to talk about the night before the accident. That was March 5th. Do you remember what you were doing that night?
Yeah, I was hanging out with Taylor, my friend. We went to the Fry Shack, which is this little place where all the Colorado high school kids hang out. And we were playing on our phones, and I got distracted by the mock trial team that showed up.
How about the next day? What did you do?
Well, I must have left my phone somewhere the day before, so I skipped school and went with Taylor to go try and find my phone. We spent all day retracing my steps, trying to find it. We called my phone a bunch from Taylor's phone, and we never found it.
When did you hear about what happened to Mr. Brackman?
I heard that something had happened to him at the end of the day. We were retracing our steps, as I said, and we ended up back at the Fry Shack. And, well, the mock trial team was there, and they said that Mr. Brackman had never shown up to practice for some reason.
Thank you, Avery. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the allegations against you. Have you heard Ms. Cifuentes testify that you sent text messages about planning to break into Mr. Brackman's house?
Yes.
And you saw a copy of these text messages earlier in trial?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to bring up previously admitted Exhibit 14?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Now, Avery, do you recognize these texts?
No, I've never seen those before today. I definitely didn't send them, ever. I would never do that. Me and Alex weren't exactly friends.
Thank you. Timekeeper, you can take those down now. And could you describe your relationship with Alex Cifuentes?
You know, me and Alex weren't exactly friends, as I said. We just knew each other through mock trial. And, you know, I know she says that we're friends, but I mean, you heard how she talked about me today in trial. I mean, I was horrified, but, you know, we're polite to one another.
And earlier in trial, did you see the ring videos?
Yes.
Was that you in the ring videos?
No, of course it wasn't me. I mean, there are so many people that look just like that, and I would never, ever do something like this. I didn't want to hurt Mr. Brackman. I wanted to apologize. I felt horrible for hurting his car.
Did you enter Coach Brackman's house on March 6th?
No, I mean, I didn't even know where he lived. I was searching for my phone with Taylor, and I didn't want to hurt Mr. Brackman.
Thank you, Avery. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Becker. You went to Colorado High School, right?
Yes,
And you did mock trial there?
yes,
And Coach Bracken was your coach.
he was.
You succeeded at mock trial competitions, right?
I was very fortunate that way. Yes, I did.
Okay. You succeeded because you were good at thinking on the spot?
When I needed to during mock trial, yeah.
So you were good at being creative on the spot as well?
Yeah, when I needed to, yeah.
Okay. Some good qualities of a mock trial student include participating in practice and being focused and attentive, right?
I think that there are a lot of good qualities in being a good mock trial student.
You didn't answer my question. Would you consider those good qualities?
I didn't do it that way, no. But I think that some people do think those are good qualities.
Okay, so would you consider yourself a good mock trial student?
I think I was very successful, which was amazing, and I really enjoyed it. So I think in that sense, yes.
Okay, but while you were at practice, you talked to your friends, right?
Yeah,
And you were on your phone instead of practicing?
I was often texting Taylor from across the room during practice.
And Coach Brackman demoted you for poor behavior, right?
He did demote me.
Okay, and you felt angry after he demoted you?
I felt embarrassed.
You were mad?
I would say I was more embarrassed. I mean, I was on the B team as a senior.
Were you frustrated about that?
I was somewhat frustrated.
Okay, and you testified that with these feelings, you vandalized Coach Brackman's car.
I vandalized his car later, but I had some of those same feelings, yeah.
Okay, and you wrote Worst Attorney Award on the car?
Yes, again.
In permanent marker?
I thought it was dry erase marker. It was
But it
the
was
stupidest
permanent
thing I've
marker.
ever done. Sadly, it was.
Okay, on his white Porsche.
It was.
Okay, and after Coach Brackman found out you vandalized his car, he kicked you off the team, right?
He did.
Okay, and deservingly so, because you wrote in permanent marker on his white Porsche.
Yeah.
Okay, on another note, your phone was lost on the day of the murder, correct?
It was. I still have no idea where it is.
And you claim on the day of the murder, you claim to have been looking for it with Taylor Perkins.
I was looking for it with Taylor Perkins.
Okay, and the night before you went to the Fry Shack?
Yes,
And you had your phone at that time.
I did.
Did you see Alex Cifuentes at the Fry Shack at that time?
Yes, I saw the entire mock trial team. They were there.
Okay, and you let Alex Cifuentes play a game on your phone at the Fry Shack, right?
I don't. Yes.
Okay. And finally, I have one more question for you. Do you remember what you said to your mom after the victim dismissed you from the mock trial team?
I was in a fit of rage, but it all calmed down afterwards, and I tried to apologize.
But do you remember exactly what you said?
Not word for word, no.
Okay, I'll be happy to refresh your memory. You said, and I quote, "I would get back at him if it was the last thing I did." No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Becker. You may step down. Defense, you can call your next witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Taylor Perkins to the stand.
All right, Ms. Perkins, go ahead and raise your right hand for me, please. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
All right, your witness, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Perkins.
Yeah.
Can you please tell the jury about yourself?
Yes, my name is Taylor Perkins. I'm currently a freshman at CU Boulder, but last year I attended Colorado High School.
And did you participate in any activities in high school?
I did actually. I was a part of the mock trial team at Colorado High School. I joined because of Avery, my best friend.
Who was the coach of the team?
It was Coach Brackman.
And how was your experience on the mock trial team?
It was really good in the beginning. I mean, it was fun. Me and Avery were both the best attorneys on the team, and I enjoyed it, but later on it wasn't as fun.
What happened?
There was just a lot of tension between Avery and Coach Brackman.
What happened regarding their relationship?
Well, it only seemed to get worse. I mean, they had different learning styles. Avery often made things up on the spot, or he wouldn't come prepared to practices. But even then, he performed flawlessly, in my opinion. But Coach Brackman didn't really like that. He told him that he should be a lot more prepared. And yeah, their relationship got worse a month before regionals when Avery showed up the most unprepared I had seen him to practice, and Coach Brackman demoted him to B team.
How did Avery react to this demotion?
I mean, he was really upset. He had worked 4 years and he had the words to prove it, but he had been demoted to B team. I mean, maybe he wasn't the most prepared he could be, but everyone knows he was A team material.
What were your thoughts on Avery's demotion?
I didn't think it was fair, and I knew how much it meant to him. He was also my really good friend. So I decided to step down from the A team a week before regionals.
And what were the effects of these two changes to the composition of the mock trial A team?
Well, since I had stepped down a week before regionals, Coach Brackman didn't really have another choice but to let Avery back on the team.
And what did that mean for the team?
Well, it helped us win regionals, and Avery won several awards, so I think it showed to me that it was the right choice to make.
And after that regional tournament, how was Avery's dealings with Coach Brackman?
Well, it wasn't what you'd expect. You'd expect Coach Brackman to congratulate him or be proud of him, but after that, after regionals, there was a practice when Coach Brackman just went off on Avery. He told him he didn't deserve all the awards that he had put work into, and it was really upsetting. He wasn't very supportive of Avery.
How, if at all, did Avery respond to this criticism?
I mean, Avery was really upset, and on his way out of practice, he grabbed what he thought was a dry erase marker, and he wrote on Coach's car.
What happened next?
Well, after that, Coach Brackman kicked Avery off the team.
Did Avery ever try to get back on the team?
Yes, he did. He tried messaging all of the team members to see if they could help him, if they could talk to Coach, but he wasn't successful.
What happened after Avery was asked to leave?
Well, after that, he came over to my house because he had gone to practice on Thursday to try to talk to Coach Brackman, which was when he was asked to leave. And after that, he came to my house.
Did anything happen after he went to your house?
Yeah, we were playing games for a while, but then we went to have dinner at the Fry Shack.
What was the dynamic like at the Fry Shack?
It was good at first. I mean, we were just having dinner, but then it turned out not to be the best choice because the mock trial team showed up and Avery got upset. I mean, he was reminded he wasn't on the team anymore.
What happened next?
Well, a lot of people on the mock trial team showed their support for him and they told him how unfair it was. They even said they'd try to help him. Even Alex Cifuentes, which was a bit surprising. But Avery got really upset and he stormed off to the bathroom.
Did Avery leave anything when he went to the bathroom?
Yes, when he stormed off to the bathroom, I noticed he left his phone on the table.
When did you realize that Avery lost his phone?
We didn't realize until the next day.
So what did you do?
Well, I recommended that we should go look for it. I mean, we didn't have too much schoolwork that day, so we skipped the day and we retraced our steps. We went to the mall where we had gone after the fry shack, and we went back to the fry shack. We looked everywhere, but we weren't able to find it.
So, how long did you search?
We searched all day. I mean, I tried calling and texting his phone. We went back to every store. We went back to the fry shack. The whole day blew by.
Was Avery with you the entire time?
Yes, he was.
So, please describe your interview with the police to discuss Mr. Brackman's death.
I didn't have an interview.
How many times did they call you to set up an interview?
They also didn't call.
How many times did they email you to set up an interview?
They didn't email me.
How many times did they text you to set up an interview?
Once again, they never reached out to me at all.
So, to the best of your knowledge, did they learn about your activities to track down Avery's lost phone?
No, I don't know how they would have been able to.
Again, to the best of your knowledge, did they learn that you'd spent this time with Avery on the day that Coach Brackman died?
I think it's impossible for them to have known without reaching out and contacting me.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Before I start my cross, can I please get a quick time check?
Yes, I have 13 minutes, 28 seconds remaining.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Ms. Perkins. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm good, thank you.
Are you ready to start?
Yes, I am.
You graduated from Colorado High School last year, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And you were on the mock trial team?
I was.
You loved mock trial too.
Sorry, what was that?
You loved mock trial too.
Sure, I mean, I really only did it because Avery convinced me to do it.
And you were good at it?
Yes, I was good.
You were on the team with Avery Becker, is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
And Avery is your best friend?
Yeah, he was my best friend at the time.
Both coached by Mackenzie Brackman?
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Both coached by Mackenzie Brackman?
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Both coached by Mackenzie Brackman?
Yes, we were both coached by Mackenzie Brackman.
And neither of you liked him?
We just didn't think his teaching styles were the best. He didn't always make the best choices for our team.
So you guys didn't have a good relationship with him?
My relationship with Coach Brackman wasn't necessarily bad. Avery and they did have a small feud, I would say. I mean, honestly, I found it funny, but I never cared enough to get involved.
Avery wasn't on time or prepared for mock trial practices, was she?
No, she wasn't the most prepared.
And Avery can be rash and have an inflated ego at times, is that correct?
Sure, I mean, I think like anyone else, he could.
Avery's behavior led to some conflict with your coach, right?
Yes, there was conflict between them.
At a practice before the regional tournament last year, Avery was unprepared and was making things up on the fly, correct?
Yes, he was.
And you thought he still performed flawlessly?
Yeah, I mean, he had this talent of being able to make things up on the spot and still do well.
No, Brackman didn't think that.
No, Brackman thought he just had a different method of teaching. He thought we should always be prepared.
So Avery got kicked off the team?
He got kicked off the team after regionals when he wrote on his car.
He was very upset about that, wasn't he?
Yes, he was upset of being off the team.
Avery sent text messages to everyone on the team to help persuade Brackman, including Alex. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think he asked for help from the team members.
Would you do anything for Avery?
No, I wouldn't.
But you dropped out of the mock trial team so Avery can get back on the A team. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think our team would have been able to win without Avery. I did say that. And it meant a lot more to Avery than it ever did to me. So I decided to step down.
You say you did it because Avery was a senior?
Yeah, and he had been working for 4 years. He had all the awards to prove it. It meant a lot more to him than it did to me.
But you were also a senior at that time, weren't you?
Yes, I was, but mock trial wasn't that important to me. I mean, I don't even want to be a lawyer.
So you were just like you were senior just like Avery, but you still decided to drop out of the team to support Avery, correct?
Yes, I mean, Avery was my good friend and I knew how much it meant to him. But once again, I really don't think we would have been able to win regionals without him.
You would do a lot to support your friend, wouldn't you?
I mean, I would support him as a friend would.
After you dropped out, Avery got into another argument with Brackman.
That was after regionals, yes.
Avery won on Brackman's card, didn't she?
Yes, he did.
With a permanent marker?
Yeah, it was a permanent marker, although that night he had told me he believed it was a dry erase marker.
But it still ruined the Porsche, didn't it?
Yes, unfortunately it did.
So Avery got kicked off the team?
Yes, he did.
But you still thought that was unfair to Avery, didn't you?
I do think it was unfair. I mean, he had put in the work for 4 years, and it meant so much to him.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Defense may call their next witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Professor Blake Van Owen to the stand.
Professor, if you'd raise your right hand for me, please. You swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
All right, your witness, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. I think it's still morning, Professor Van Owen. Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Of course. Good morning. My name is Professor Blake Van Owen, and I teach and study criminal justice.
How did you find yourself working in this area of criminal justice?
Well, I've sort of always felt drawn towards criminal justice. I've always wanted to make a positive impact into my community, so I became a police officer. But I left the force after about 9 months when I realized that there were numerous practices with which I disagreed and that the police force wasn't something I could be a part of anymore. So I left to pursue a career that felt like I was actually helping people.
And what kind of things did you pursue to that end?
I actually worked a few jobs after that. I first worked as a school resource officer, then I went into private security, and then I began teaching classes on police practices.
And since then, have you continued teaching? Have you done anything new? What's your life looked like?
I have continued to teach, but I've also gone back to school and I've received my master's in criminal justice. And I've also begun work as a private investigator, where in cases like these, I'll testify as an expert.
And what areas have you testified in before?
Well, I've testified regularly in crime scene reconstruction, cell tower data analysis, and general police practices.
And when you say regularly, about how many times would you say you've testified in these areas?
Well, I've been testified as an expert in all these areas at least 5 times, and I've been admitted as an expert in multiple states. I think Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, Arizona, New Mexico, and Wyoming.
Thank you, Professor. At this time, I move to admit Professor Blake Van Owen as an expert in the fields of crime scene reconstruction, cell site analysis, and general police practices.
Thank you. Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. Professor Van Owen will be qualified as an expert in those areas. You may continue, Ms. Kinney.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Professor, I'd like to start broad. What is the biggest takeaway you have from your time spent looking at the investigation done on this case?
I believe that this was a rushed investigation that was filled with mistakes and that the police chose their suspect before they even really started investigating.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Response, Your Honor.
Any response? Yes, ma'am.
As I've just testified, Professor Van Owen in the fields of general police practices and crime scene reconstruction, and her job is to look over the investigation done by the police. She can speculate as to how the police's investigation was performed.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Any response, Miss? Yes, Miss Jack, go ahead.
Yes. So Blake Van Owen said that the people on the prosecution made decisions before they had evidence to support them and immediately jumped to a conclusion, which is untrue, and she's speculating about that.
All right. I'll go ahead and allow her to testify in this manner. She is an expert, so your objection is overruled. You may continue, Ms. Kinney.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Professor, when you said that they chose their suspect before they even started, what did you mean by that?
Yes, well, the first place that Detective Markowitz looked into was the high school mock trial team, where they heard from one student, Alex Fuentes, about Avery Becker. In fact, I don't believe Detective Markowitz ever interviewed anybody else on the team. So they essentially conducted this investigation with only Mr. Becker in mind.
Thank you. Now, what other parts of Detective Markowitz's case led you to those conclusions about rushed and filled with mistakes that you stated a minute ago?
Well, you've already heard from the prosecution about these text messages that supposedly show Mr. Becker's intent to break into Mr. Brackman's home, but I believe that you were misled as to the legitimacy of these text messages.
So what is your opinion as to the legitimacy of these text messages?
These text messages were actually screenshots sent to the police department by Alex Fuentes. The police could have checked to see if these screenshots were in fact a real accurate text message conversation that actually happened. They have this software called Celebrate, which takes all the data off of a phone so they can look at it to see if it's real. But Detective Markowitz chose not to.
And Professor, before I move on, were there any other parts of Detective Markowitz's general investigation that you'd like to discuss?
As a part of their investigation into the crime scene, as is standard in any crime scene investigation, the police took photos of the crime scene. And a few of these photos, in particular the ones of the blood spatter, went missing. The files were corrupted. But in any other case, I might say that their disappearance was more dubious. But here I think it's just incompetence, because what competent police department only has one file of their crime scene photos?
Thank you, Professor. Now, I'd like to talk about another part of Detective Markowitz's investigation, the cell site analysis. Would you tell us your thoughts on this part of their investigation?
Yes, the prosecution showed you these cell site data and said, if Mr. Becker's phone connected to these towers, then obviously it was there, and obviously Mr. Becker was there along with it. But that's simply not how cell towers work.
And Your Honor, before we move on, may I have permission for the timekeeper to pull up previously admitted Exhibit 16 so the jury may have reference for what Professor Van Owen is about to describe?
Yes, you may. Oh,
thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Now, Professor, when you say that these could be misleading and that's not how cell towers work, what do you mean by that? Can you elaborate?
Of course. See, your phone isn't designed to connect you to the closest tower. It's designed to connect you to the one that will get you the best signal. So you could be standing right next to a cell tower and still connect to one miles away. So just because Mr. Becker's phone pinged along these towers, that doesn't mean his phone was there, and that certainly doesn't mean Mr. Becker was there.
And when you say it certainly doesn't mean Mr. Becker was there, what do you mean by that?
Well, you've already heard both Ms. Taylor Perkins and Mr. Becker testify today that Avery had lost his phone and that they were looking for it. Anybody could have had it in this route that the phone supposedly went along is a major walking route comprised of several major roads whose sole purpose aren't only to get to Mr. Brackman's home.
Thank you, Professor. Now, before I move on from the cell site data, was there anything else about Detective Markowitz's cell site investigation that struck you as poorly executed?
Yes, Detective Markowitz could have easily checked Mr. Becker's alibi by pulling the cell site data records from Ms. Taylor's phone and checking to see if any of the general locations their phone connected to matched up with any of the general locations that they described going to that day. But again, he chose not to. I believe that Detective Markowitz only pulled the cell site data of Mr. Becker's phone from this window of time.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, timekeeper. I am done with Exhibit 16. Now, Professor, I'd like to talk about the one other part of the prosecution's case, the crime scene reconstruction done by Kyle Kuzak. What are your opinions on Ms. Kuzak's reconstruction?
I believe that Mr. Kuzak's investigation was filled with assumptions. For example, he opines that the scuff marks found on the kitchen floor are somehow indications of a struggle, but there's no way to prove this. Their story also hinges on Mr. Brackman both having heard Ring doorbell notifications on his phone and having grabbed a knife in self-defense. But again, he can't prove either of these.
And Professor, I mean, I think as someone who has worked with CSR, we can both say that sometimes you have to make assumptions in that line of work. Why were the assumptions made in this case so troubling to you?
The assumptions made by Mr. Kuzak didn't seem to really fit with much of the physical evidence, but instead seemed to match remarkably well with what Detective Markowitz believed to have happened at the scene. And it's just troubling that these assumptions weren't made from physical evidence, but seemingly with this secondary intention to make a young man look guilty.
Thank you, Professor. Now, I know you completed your own reconstruction of the scene. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about that?
Yes, I actually don't believe that my reconstruction is all that important because it's my opinion that Mr. Becker wasn't at the scene of the crime at all. So it doesn't matter the exact way in which Mr. Brackman was stabbed because it's my opinion that Mr. Becker wasn't even there. I think the thing to focus on here is that Mr. Kuzak's investigation was filled with unsupported assumptions that I believe unfairly aided the police's theory that it was Avery.
Thank you, Professor Van Owen. Now, on the subject of your conclusions, I'd like to return to the point you made earlier about how the police only ever had one suspect, Avery Becker. Did you investigate other suspects where they did not?
I can't point to anybody with 100% certainty, but I'm sure that there were multiple other people at least worth looking into.
And what kind of people would those be?
Well, I would like to point out as Mr. Brackman was a defense attorney, it's likely that he had many disgruntled clients or families of clients. In particular, a student named Blair Rollins, who went to the same high school as Mr. Becker.
Would you tell us more about Blair Rollins?
Yes. Well, Mr. Brackman worked as a defense attorney for Blair Rollins' father, and he ended up being convicted by the jury. I believe he got life in prison. And, well, I can't tell you if Mr. Rollins did this crime. I certainly believe that there was just as much cause, if not more so, to look into Blair Rollins, yet the police never even considered them an option.
Thank you, Professor. Just one final question, if I may. After reviewing all of Detective Markowitz's investigation, all of the crime scene reconstruction, do you think that the prosecution have enough evidence to identify Avery Becker as the intruder with 100% certainty?
Absolutely not. The only physical evidence that they were able to find that could possibly point to Mr. Becker as the intruder is misleading cell site data and screenshots of a text message conversation that we can't ever be sure actually ever happened. So no, I don't believe that they do.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Good morning, Professor Van Owen.
Good morning.
You started your career in law enforcement with the Aurora Police Department, correct?
Yes, I did.
But you had to leave that job, right?
Yeah, I left, I did.
And that's because you injured a young woman of color during an arrest, correct?
Yes, it was then that
That was just a yes or no question, thank you.
I believe that the question deserves more than a yes or no question, or a yes or no answer.
Okay.
See, I was using a technique that had been authorized by the police department, and when she got injured, it really struck me that this wasn't a place that I could be a part of. And even though the police cleared me of any wrongdoing, I never could clear myself of any wrongdoing.
Okay. You say when she got injured, when she was injured by you, correct?
Yes, and I'm
Thank you.
incredibly regretful to this day.
She sued the APD because of the incident, right?
Yes, she did. And she also sued me personally, but I can't tell you how much for.
And you became a private investigator afterwards?
I actually became a private investigator a bit after that, after I had worked a few other jobs and went to college.
Okay. In that field, you charge $225 per hour for research, writing, and investigative work, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And $450 per hour for deposition and court testimony?
Yes, I believe that's the amount I charge.
And you make $8,000 for your work on this case?
I think right now it's about 7,000, but it might be more by the end.
All right. And you only testify as a defense expert, correct?
Yes, but that's because the prosecution generally uses their own in-house expert witnesses that already work for the police department.
Okay. And for your work as a defense expert, you get paid, right?
Yes, but I would like to point out that as members of the police department and as employees of the state, the prosecution's expert witnesses are also getting paid for their time today.
Okay. Now, regarding the work on your case, your job was to review the work of Detective Markowitz and Kyle Kuzak, correct?
Yes, it was.
And both of them went to the scene of a crime, right?
Yes, I believe so.
And you never went to the scene of a crime, correct?
No, what I do is it's not 100% necessary for me to go to the scene of the crime. And by the time I had been contacted by the defendant, if I had gone to the scene of the crime, it would have been an entirely different crime scene.
All right. Now let's discuss some details of the case. You believe that the knife was brought to the crime scene, correct?
Yes, I believe that's much more likely than it having come from the home.
Do you have evidence of the knife being brought to the crime scene?
I don't have any evidence, but
Thank you.
Kuzak doesn't have any evidence that it came from the home either.
Can you see a knife in any of the security footage?
Not in his hands, but it's not entirely impossible that it's hidden under his clothes, because what person walks around with a knife in their hands?
All right. But you say that we don't have evidence to suggest that the knife was at the crime scene, but there was an empty slot in the knife block in Brackman's kitchen, correct?
Yes, but this knife block is filled with knives of an entirely different design and an entirely different brand. So I believe that it's unlikely that it came from that knife block.
It was the size of the slot, correct?
Yes, but again, it doesn't fit with the style or the same make of the knives in the knife block. So I think it's unlikely that Brackman would have kept it in that knife block.
In addition to the knife block, there was also an open knife drawer, correct?
Yes, I believe that there was.
Does your theory for the crime account for this open knife drawer at all?
What I would like to point out is that
was a yes or no question. Does your theory account for the open knife drawer?
No, but Kuzak's doesn't either.
Okay. Kuzak did say, however, that Brackman went to go look for a knife, though, right? To defend himself?
It's my belief. I think that Kuzak claims that the knife came from the knife block.
Okay. Now let's discuss how you think the murder weapon was used. You believe that Brackman was sitting down at the kitchen table when he was stabbed, correct?
I think so, yes.
Okay. This would mean that he was completely unaware of the intruder entering his residence.
I think so.
And this was despite the Ring doorbell that he had, right?
Yes, he had a Ring doorbell, but we didn't know if he had notifications on or if he saw them, if he did.
But Ring doorbells do send notifications to the person.
But you can turn these notifications off, and Detective Markowitz never checked to see if he did.
People purchase Ring doorbells so that they can use the camera function, correct?
I guess so, but you can turn notifications off.
Okay.
It's not entirely out of the realm of possibility.
All right. The intruder went to the front and the back door, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. So Brackman would have received multiple notifications of the intruder by the residents.
Assuming that he had them turned on and that he saw them, yes. Okay. But I don't think
the intruder also made a sound while entering through the back door, correct?
I believe opening a door could make some sound, but I don't know if you heard it.
And your theory of the case relies on Brackman not hearing the sound of the back door and also not seeing the notifications, correct?
I think it's a just as likely assumption, if not more so, than him having heard it.
Okay, you think it's more likely that he would have just stayed seated at the kitchen table when somebody entered through his back door noisily?
I don't think it was noisily, but...
Okay. But it was right there, and he just stayed seating at the table, right?
We have no way of knowing.
Okay. So let's discuss the cell tower data collected by Markowitz. Cell phones connect to the tower that provides the best signal, right?
Yes, they do.
Okay, and that signal that's almost always the closest cell tower, correct?
Not necessarily. In a highly populated metropolitan area,
Okay.
towers are busy all the time.
We're considering a residential area, correct?
I guess so, but there's a lot of people there.
Okay. And on the day of a murder, Avery Becker's phone connected to the towers that she would have had she traveled to Brackman's house, or that he had.
Not necessarily. Those towers could have been busy, and the phone could have been miles away and still connected to those towers. Just because it doesn't mean
it's a complete coincidence that this happened at exactly the time had he traveled to Brackman's house. Is it a complete coincidence?
Well, excuse me, could you repeat the question?
So according to what you're saying, it's a complete coincidence that the phone connected to increasingly closer towers and then increasingly farther away towers at the time Avery Becker would have traveled to Brackman's house to commit the murder and traveled back home. Is that a coincidence?
I think that could be a coincidence, yes. I don't think it's entirely impossible, and nobody can say. There's no way to precisely locate a phone based off of this kind of data.
Okay. So let's discuss your alternate theory of the case. Your idea is that Blair Rollins was the one who killed Brackman, correct?
I think this is another possible way that Brackman could have died.
Okay. And do you think Rollins had Becker's phone on the day of the murder?
I think that it's possible that he did, yes.
Do you have any evidence to suggest that?
I believe that Blair Rollins was at I believe he was at the Fry Shack the night of that Avery and Taylor were there, and that's where Avery says that he lost his phone, so it's not entirely impossible.
Are you sure of that statement that Rollins was at the Fry Shack? Because that's not in your testimony.
I don't think Rollins was there. I believe Avery was there, and it's possible, not Avery, Alex. Alex was there, and it's possible that Alex gave the phone to Blair.
Okay. Do you have any evidence indicating Rollins' location on the day of the murder?
No, but there's also no evidence indicating anybody else's location for sure the day of the murder.
Well, we do have the CDR data for Avery, correct?
No, Avery didn't have that phone.
You don't have any evidence to suggest that Avery didn't have the phone, though, right?
Both Avery and Taylor testify to them having lost the phone the night before.
But it was Avery's phone, correct?
Yes, it was Avery's phone.
You just testified saying that you have no evidence saying that anybody else had the phone, correct?
No, I think I must have misspoke, or you must have misheard me. I can't point to who had the phone, but it wasn't Avery or Taylor.
Okay. So just to clarify, you don't have any evidence indicating that Rollins was the one who committed the crime, do you?
No, but what I would like to point out is that
questions, Your Honor.
Considered Rollins a suspect. I'm not saying that Rollins did it. I'm saying that they should have looked into Rollins at all.
Okay. No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down. It's now time for closing arguments. Do the people have a closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor. And if I could use my remaining time in a rebuttal, if possible, I'd like to do that, please.
Yes, you may. Go ahead, counsel.
All right, I will begin. Members of the jury, on March 6th of last year, Mackenzie Brackman, a hardworking and dedicated attorney and mock trial coach, was brutally stabbed to death by an intruder who had entered his residence, and he deserves justice. Based on the evidence presented during today's trial, it is clear that Avery Becker is guilty of his crime beyond a reasonable doubt. The people have called you today to convict Avery Becker on 2 counts, murder in the 1st degree and 2nd degree burglary of a dwelling. Let me remind you what that means. A guilty verdict on count 1 would mean that Avery Becker unlawfully committed or attempted to commit 2nd degree burglary, and during the course of that crime, the death of Mackenzie Brackman was caused by anyone. Avery Becker likely didn't enter the house with the intention to murder Mackenzie Brackman. He went to his former mock trial coach's house to play a prank on him, just like he had done many times before. But what matters is that Avery wrongfully entered the residence and Mackenzie Brackman died. This was a break-in gone bad, and sadly went very badly. Nonetheless, Avery needs to be held accountable for his actions on that day, which is why the prosecution presented you with 3 key witnesses. The evidence from these witnesses gives a reasonable account of how the break-in went badly, places Avery at the scene of a crime at the time of the murder, and describes the history behind his tumultuous relationship with Brackman. Detective Jordan Markowitz was assigned to the case. When she arrived at the scene, she witnessed the awful sight of Mackenzie Brackman dead on the floor in a pool of blood. The evidence of the crime scene was indicative of a struggle between Brackman and the intruder. This theory was corroborated by Kyle Kuzak, the crime scene reconstructor assigned to the case. Based on their investigation, we know how the murder went down. On March 6, Avery Becker entered the residence and was confronted by Brackman, who had been notified by the break-in by either his ring app or by the sound made by the back door. Realizing what was going on, Brackman had hurried to his kitchen to find a weapon, opening his knife drawer and ultimately grabbing a large knife from the kitchen block to defend himself. When he was confronted by Avery, the two struggled over the knife, and Avery gained control of it and stabbed him. In the process, they left scuff marks, a broken plate on the floor, and a knocked-over chair, clear indicators of the struggle. Now, how do we know the intruder was truly Avery? The evidence makes it clear that the intruder didn't plan to murder Brackman, which isn't what Avery Becker wanted to do. He wanted to break in and trash Brackman's house, which is why he went in the middle of the day on a weekday when Brackman usually wouldn't have been home. It's also why he didn't bring a weapon to the crime scene. But when Avery entered the residence, his former coach greeted him with a knife. Avery's reaction to that had serious, irreversible consequences for which Avery Becker, an adult, needs to be held accountable. After the investigation of the crime scene, Markowitz obtained cell phone and cell tower records and used them to track the locations of Avery's phone on the day of the murder. Those records indicate Avery Becker traveling from his home to Brackman's residence at exactly the time he would have to commit the murder. The defense will tell you that Avery lost his phone the day before. That's a very coincidental story considering that his phone traveled from his home to Brackman's on the day of the murder. They'll say the actual murderer took his phone with him to Brackman's house, but there's no evidence to prove that. They'll also say he had an alibi on the day of the murder, Taylor Perkins, but Perkins is Avery's best friend, someone who would do anything for them. There's a final component to consider from today's trial, and it answers the question of why. Why did Avery feel the need to break in and trash Brackman's house? The answer is quite clear. The two had a very volatile relationship during Avery's mock trial career, and Avery did not like his coach. The final straw came when Brackman criticized Avery for being unprepared for practice, and he took it incredibly poorly. Displaying anger, immaturity, and rash decision-making, he grabbed a permanent marker and vandalized his coach's Porsche. Quite understandably, Brackman kicked him off the team, which infuriated Avery even more. Avery told his mom he would get back at Brackman if that was the last thing he did. He texted Alex Cifuentes asking for help getting back on the team, and when he said Brackman wouldn't budge, he told her about her plan to trash his house. And Avery followed through. He got his revenge, just not in the way he might have imagined it happening. It was a break-in gone bad. It may have been an accident, but Avery Becker must be held accountable, and Mackenzie Brackman deserves justice. Thus, the prosecution asks you, the jury, to find Avery Becker guilty of first-degree murder and second-degree burglary. Thank you.
Thank you. Any closing argument from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Rushed, reckless, guilty until proven innocent. Members of the jury, in their frantic stampede to condemn a suspect, Detective Markowitz's investigation became rushed, reckless, and filled with mistakes. The police decided Avery Becker was guilty until proven innocent, and not the other way around. They only ever had one suspect, only ever interviewed one person, relied on faulty cell site data and faulty text messages, and yet were determined to convict a high school boy. Today, we've shown you that the prosecution's story is little more than holes, mistakes, and assumptions strung together by pieces of broken narrative. Now, members of the jury, the prosecution has the burden of proof today. Pursuant to jury instructions 7, 8, and 9, they must prove to you beyond any reasonable doubt that on March 6th of 2020, Avery Becker committed second-degree burglary by knowingly entering 444 South Flower Street with the intent to commit criminal mischief, and in doing so, killed Mackenzie Brackman. And as jury instruction number 2 tells you, if you find that any of these elements have not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, you must find Avery Becker not guilty. Now, I'd like you to notice that all the elements the prosecution must prove are contingent upon one thing, that Avery Becker was in fact at 444 South Flower Street on March 6th of 2020. The prosecution tried to use cell site data to attempt to prove this point. All they showed was a police team desperate to make an arrest, jumping to conclusions. You heard from Professor Van Owen that cell site analysis cannot definitively show the location of a phone. And more importantly, you heard from both Avery and Taylor that Avery was not, in fact, in possession of his phone on March 6th because he had lost it the night before and he was looking for it. Now, members of the jury, if you cannot be sure that Avery and his phone were at the scene of the crime, you cannot find Avery Becker guilty. You even heard Detective Markowitz testify on cross-examination that she can't be sure that Avery had the phone on that day, and she can't be sure that the phone was definitively at the residence. But why stop there, members of the jury? The prosecution tried to prove to you that Avery had motive to break into Mr. Brackman's house, pursuant to jury instruction number 8. They showed you text messages supposedly sent from Avery Becker to Alex Cifuentes. But members of the jury, Professor Van Owen made you aware that these text messages were in fact screenshots and that Detective Markowitz never even attempted to verify them despite having the technology to do so. And on the list goes. Detective Markowitz never looked into any suspects other than Avery Becker. Detective Markowitz never interviewed anyone other than Alex Cifuentes. Detective Markowitz never pulled cell site data other than Avery Becker's. Detective Markowitz never visited the places that Avery and Taylor testified to visiting on March 6th. Detective Markowitz never looked into Blair Rollins. Now, members of the jury, the prosecution made one other attempt to prove that Avery Becker committed felony murder. They brought before you Kyle Kuzak, the crime scene reconstructionist. But Mr. Kuzak's reconstruction sports as many assumptions as Detective Markowitz's investigation does mistakes. Mr. Kuzak assumed the scuff marks were indications of a fight. They assumed Mr. Brackman heard the Ring doorbell. They assumed the knife came from inside the house. They didn't even recognize that in 2 different video clips, the intruder was wearing 2 different shoes. They can't even be sure there was only one intruder. And while these assumptions may not align particularly well with any of the physical evidence at the scene, they do align suspiciously well with Detective Markowitz's version of the story. But even so, members of the jury, these assumptions cannot point to Avery Becker beyond a reasonable doubt. Assumptions are simply not a basis for conviction. So I'd like you to think about Avery and Taylor's testimony. Unlike with the prosecution's story, you won't have to stretch your mind or fill in gaps to believe them. Avery Becker is just a high school kid who wants to make it to college. He just wants to move on with his life, and yet his whole world is being put on trial by a prosecution that clearly wants a conviction, regardless of the faulty and lacking evidence. Members of the jury, don't let the prosecution make Avery Becker guilty until proven innocent. Look at the evidence for yourself and see the reasonable doubt seeping through the holes in their story. Find Avery Becker not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Any rebuttal close from the people?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe I have 49 seconds.
Go ahead, counsel.
All right, I'll begin that now. The conclusions made in this case are not based on assumptions, they are based on evidence. And let me remind you what that evidence is, proving that Avery is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. First of all, the crime scene. There was a broken plate, a knocked over chair, an open knife drawer, an empty slot in a knife block, a Ring doorbell, and a sound made as the intruder entered through the back door. The defense's theory of what happened has no explanation for any of that. There was clearly a struggle, and that's indicative of an intruder entering the house for burglary and then it turning into murder, which is exactly what happened. We also have the CDR data, which the defense has not given, or which the prosecution has not given a good reason for why this would not be reliable. It's often used to track location, and it shows that Avery went to Mr. Brackman's house on the day of the murder. Lastly, we have the screenshots. Additionally, we know that Avery said he would get back at Brackman if it was the last thing he did. Keep that in mind when you make your decisions.
All right, thank you, folks. That will conclude our trial. We're going to give our scorekeepers just a few minutes to fill out and submit their score sheets. Once they've done that, I'll ask that they activate their cameras, and then we'll give you some closing thoughts. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, everyone. All of the score sheets are submitted. You guys can do your remarks now.
I think we have all of our scorers back up. Is that right? Okay.
Yes, you guys are ready to go.
All right, very good. I'll go ahead and start. I think all of you did a fantastic job. Obviously, it's difficult times doing this on Zoom versus doing it in person, but I think you should all be commended. You did an amazing work here today. The presentation of the case was well done. All of the witnesses did a great job. The attorneys did a great job. I saw some things. I presided over around last evening, and I saw some things here today that I hadn't seen before. The identification of the defendant by the prosecution witness, I thought was a nice touch. The discussion of the scuff marks being parallel, so they maybe weren't actually scuff marks, I thought was a good job. And then pointing out the fact that there were two different sets of shoes on the person on the ring camera, which was something that had not been pointed out in the prior round that I had presided over. So I thought those were all nice touches. I think as far as the witnesses are some of my favorite because it's really there's a lot of acting that goes into that. I thought Mr. Jones did a fine job as Avery Becker, kind of a bit of a passionate denial of a person who is wrongly framed for this crime. And I thought Miss Landa Poses did a nice job as Miss Perkins as well. When she said, well, I didn't mind stepping off of the mock trial team because I never really wanted to be an attorney anyhow. That made me chuckle. And then I think both attorneys, Miss Kenny and Miss Jack, did a wonderful job with the direct and the cross of witness Van Owens. I thought that was probably my favorite portion of the trial. So you should all be commended. You all did a fantastic job. So good work and best of luck moving forward. We'll turn over to our scoring panelists. I'll call you out in order, alphabetical order. Hopefully I've got it right. We'll start with Kay Granath.
Yes, I want to say that I like this round better than the round I did on Thursday. So that made me happy to hear some new evidence that hadn't been brought before. This is my 15th year to do this, but it's my first year to do it via Zoom. I thought y'all did a great job. The only thing I wanted two little comments. There were a few times that I noticed the students weren't looking directly at the camera. They were looking down and reading. So just be cautious of that because we can see when you're reading. And there was a couple of times that I noticed some students were it was like they were reading a script. And if you were really in the courtroom, you could look down, but you can't just have your head down the whole time. So that was just my only comment I had, but I thought y'all did a fantastic job. Really, very good. Very, very good.
Thank you. Next, we'll talk to Mary Jo Gross.
I don't have much to add over the comments of Judge Vermo and Kay. I have been doing this for quite a while as well. I never did litigation, so I am your person off the street. I was so impressed with everyone and the witnesses. Mr. Jones, it's just like, I was almost ready to weep. And he was so full of remorse. And I'd like to say that Miss Trembeth, you did everything you could to get in information that the prosecution did not want to hear. And I really, that I think went across the board with the witnesses, that it was supposed to be a yes or no answer, and you just hung in there and you just got in all the information you wanted. Counsel, I thought you were excellent. I realized one thing is going to happen with Zoom, and when you're not just facing the scoring panel, it just got a little fast for me at the end. I was just thinking that possibly if you were addressing the jury directly, that you might slow down a little bit. But in your defense, I have coping mechanisms for hearing, and next Thursday I'm getting hearing aids. So I'm sure this will all be cleared up by next year.
Funny. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Barbara Johnson Stern.
Hi, it's really hard to add anything to that. I'll start with the witnesses. Again, you guys were all so good. Every single witness, you knew your material so well. And I agree with Miss Jo Gross that you both really, all six of you really hung in there and weren't bullied by the defense or the cross-examination. You guys all just really knew your material and you were solid team performers. And I would just be really pleased and excited to go in the next round. I can't think of a critique to give any of you witnesses. You were all really so good. Lawyers, you were all, again, we're all going to say it, probably very, very good. You all knew your case, your content of your directs and your cross and your opening and your closings was really solid. I agree with His Honor that I saw some things today that I hadn't seen before that I really, really appreciated. When it came to me for scoring, the only differential, in my opinion, was how consistent you were in playing the part of your attorneys. And I would say Miss Kinney and Miss Jack, to me, you guys were consistent from the very beginning to the very end. You came with a lot of energy. You really, really played the parts well. You were both very credible. And I thought you just did a really spectacular job today. And it was really fun to watch you. And I learned from all of you. I think we can learn from everybody. And you guys really taught me a few things. As to generally what I would say, in terms of the script reading, the reason that kind of detracts from your performance is while the content is great, when you're reading a script or you're reading your notes, it prevents you from sort of stepping out of that script and acting the part a little stronger. So that's why I would try my best to move away from those notes if I could. And then the only other thing I would encourage you, when you are doing cross-examination, I know that it's difficult to balance between professionalism and respect, but also controlling that witness. And I would say probably each one of you might feel free to be a little bit more assertive in controlling those witnesses on cross. The witnesses did a great job. They were clearly going to say what they wanted to say. And so I think maybe if just in the back of your mind, you feel a little bit more empowered to be a little strong-handed with your witnesses while still maintaining that level of professionalism and respect. And you guys as a professional group were spectacular. Nobody lost their temper. Nobody got frustrated. You guys were just a pleasure to watch today. Thank you so much.
And finally, Kylie Schaumleffel.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything everyone else has said. You guys did amazing. My favorite parts were the openings and the closings. I thought those were really fun to watch. Just the pacing and the emotion and the energy you guys put into it was great. Same, I know everyone's kind of talked about the notes, but one thing that I noticed is when you are referring to notes, you guys speed up a lot. And so it's kind of hard to take in all the information. So if you do have to rely on your notes, just try and slow down, because I think it allows you to have that same level of energy and allows, your jurors or judges to intake more of the information that you're saying. I think notes are fine and sometimes inevitable. Just make sure you're slowing down if you're using them. One other piece of feedback I had is try not to end on an objection. That was something I was told when I did mock trial. So whether it's like your cross or your direct, I think it just kind of like takes the wind out of your steam, like wind out of your sails a little bit to end on an objection. So even if you're going back to maybe a question you've already asked and you can squeeze that in, or, you know, try and think of something on the fly the best you can. I think that's a lot better way to end if you can.
And we have a bonus scorer. Anthony Pereira joined us as well.
Oh, okay, Mr. Pereira, go ahead.
Echoing what everyone says, witnesses did a great job. I wrote down first names, so I apologize. So Charlie has a difficult time playing an unlikable character, potentially, but he made him pretty good. I thought Jackson did a really good job, especially on cross when he was getting cross-examined by giving short answers, but also giving more information than just a yes or no. So I thought both of those were clearly well done. I agree with pacing of how you're speaking. I think it's very difficult to do because you are on a time crunch, but I think if you could slow down as much as possible, that will help you going forward and get good answers, both from direct and on cross, if you can slow down and make a clear, short question if possible. I really liked the happy to refresh your memory, but then once you get it, you can end with another question as far as, and those are your words, right? To get a confirmation from the client or from the witness at that point. Looking at my notes here. I thought the witnesses were believable, balancing the professionalism with doing a cross-examination is difficult. I thought Marigold, I apologize if I mispronounced her name, did a really good job on her cross to treat her witness with respect. Good morning, and then asking good questions like, hey, you're good at mock trial, right? To kind of get a adverse witness on your side. I thought that was a good technique as well. And then I echo what Kylie mentioned as far as try not to end on a loss, as far as on an objection, have a backup question or something like that would be good. Overall, I thought witnesses were really good. I thought the counsel was really good. I thought openings clearly stated the case and closings echoed what the opening was, which is well rehearsed, and you guys are very clearly prepared.
All right, thank you, folks. That'll conclude our comments. Best of luck moving forward into the next round. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your time at mock trial. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.